Thank you for coming out. My name is Yurina Valiulis. Yes, it's a mouthful. You don't have to pronounce it, so don't worry. I'll be your moderator for tonight. We have a great panel, and let's get started. So, first of all, a little bit of introductions. Can you tell us your name and who you are and everything in 2 minutes? Let's start here. Hi.
Okay, the pressure's on. Hi, everyone. My name is Vicky. I am the Communications Director at Cause Communications, which is a nonprofit social impact consulting agency. We've been around for 45 years, working with organizations all across Los Angeles and frankly the country. I joined Cause fairly recently, but what I've really enjoyed so far is not only the consulting work that we're doing right around social communications and social impact, but also the capacity building work that we've been doing. So our work is really about building the sector and building capacity for nonprofit organizations who may not have resources. So we actually offer a number of free resources and toolkits, and that's something that I really admired about the organization and just learning the environment atmosphere. Prior to Cause, I actually have experience working in all the sectors, sort of, in nonprofit, for-profit, and corporate private sectors, always at the intersection of communications, development, CSR, DE&I, just different areas and functions, and just really driven and motivated by this, I don't know, there's something within me that just tells me I want to be a part of something bigger than me, and that's just what has motivated me throughout my career. I'm really honored to be here with all of you tonight. Thank you for coming, and I'm looking forward to hearing from fellow panelists.
Thank you so much. And now we have Christiane. Did I pronounce it correctly?
Yes, Yurina, thank you. Hi, everybody. My name is Christiane Maertens. I am the founder of DoGoodery. We are a full-service agency. We work with brands to help them implement to help design, implement, and manage their social impact strategies. My background, I started off at the Walt Disney Company in social responsibility 17 years ago, which is so hard to believe, but I was very fortunate to work for the CFO of the company, where he and my other boss, Dr. Beth Stevens, really prioritized corporate responsibility and corporate social responsibility. So it was then when I really got to learn what it meant to invest a lot of money and time into doing the right thing. And that's kind of how I got my start in this career in social impact. I worked then for an environmental education nonprofit in DC for 7 years, running our corporate partnership portfolio, at which point I really saw sort of an opportunity in the market to help companies think through their impact strategies, but not only help design their strategies, but our agency basically serves as like an extension of corporate responsibility department. So we do a lot of the day-to-day management, helping them get this work off the ground. Communications obviously is a very big part of it, but we also have the opportunity to work with a lot of corporations' internal comms teams too with the work that we do. So it's a lot of fun. I am so happy to be here. I'm a big fan of Allie. I don't know where she is, but if you're in the room somewhere, Allie, thank you so much. And I got to meet these lovely panelists last week over a Zoom call at 5 p.m. on a very sunny day. And it's really nice to be here with all of you today. So thank you for being here.
Thank you, and yes, we all are a big fan of Allie. Thank you, Allie.
Yeah.
She's the brain behind all of this, so thank you. You want to go
Sure. I'm Paul Hernandez, I'm Chief Strategy Officer with Fenton Communications. I'm now going into my 12th year at Fenton. I've been doing social change, social impact work for almost 30 years. And Fenton focuses exclusively on social impact communications. We're the largest firm in the country that does that. Been around for about 40 years. And we primarily work with nonprofits, foundations, the public sector, private sector at times. Really about every kind of cause you can imagine: homelessness, education, climate, racial equity, LGBTQ, voting rights. Our clients are really at the forefront of a lot of big movements that are going on in the country. So we're really fortunate to have them as partners and be able to support that really great work. I started off not doing communications. I actually started off in politics, doing legislative work at the County of LA, with one member of the LA County Board of Supervisors. Ran a small nonprofit after that, focused on how to build better schools. and then worked for the California Endowment for many years, which is a health foundation based here in Los Angeles, and did a lot of work on improving health policy, improving health outcomes here in the state, and then started doing consulting. So I've been able to work in a lot of different sectors, always around mission. That's always been something very important to me, and it's something I just have to do. I can't do anything else. So pleased to be here, pleased to have this kind of conversation, and thank you all for being here and coming on a Wednesday, Tuesday? Tuesday. So, these are my days, so thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, it's hard to keep the days right. Correct. You want to go ahead?
Yeah. Hi everyone, I'm Rosalina Jowers. I'm the Director of Communications and Marketing at Participant, which is a production company that specializes in stories around impact and also creates impact campaigns around our films, some of which include John Lewis Get Trouble, Judas the Black Messiah, Roma, Spotlight, and Inconvenient Truth, and a few others probably that Allie will probably check me on because we work together, and she's also on our team. So thank you for having us. Prior to Participant, I actually worked in DC in politics as well. So I worked at an issue advocacy organization that focused on telling stories and educating the public about issues like healthcare, taxes, and economy. And then prior to that, I worked in social impact PR at a PR company called Weber Shandwick, where we also really focused on creating sustainable impact campaigns for corporate clients like Dove, Kimberly-Clark, Nike, etc. So have always loved social impact and being able to now work at Participant, where we are able to build social impact campaigns around really engaging films and help use these stories to make a change is sort of a dream come true. So really excited to talk more about it with you all today.
Thank you. So getting back on the topic that we are here today, I know we come from different sides. On my side, I come from journalism, and now I'm in government. And I know all of you have different perspectives. And can you talk about how would you define social responsibility? Who wants to start?
I'll jump in. I mean, obviously, when we think about social responsibility communications, it's a pretty wide spectrum, and I think it depends on what sector you're coming in, whether if you're on the corporate side, if you're in the public sector, if you're a foundation, you're in an advocacy group. They're all kind of in the field, but they're all going to be hitting it a different way, And so I think for a lot of the groups that we work with at Fenton, the social responsibility communications is really everything they do. It's not sort of one piece of what they do. It's about them moving an agenda in which communications has to help support them. So if they're trying to get people off the street and build more permanent supportive housing to help deal with homelessness, the communications is meant to support that. If they're trying to figure out ways to invest in more early childhood education to make sure that our kids get a great start, everything they do is focused on that. And so in the field that we work in, it's always really interesting and fascinating to me because of the fact that there's such a singular focus, and we're not necessarily having to compete with something else they might be doing. So it provides a level of granularity, and I don't want to say purity because I think that diminishes other kinds of things, but there's greater singular focus on it. And ultimately, it's about changing lives. It's ultimately about how do we use communications to fundamentally improve people's lives? How do we fix a problem that they're dealing with? How do we provide opportunity? How do we deal with a social ill that we all recognize and are seeing? So for us, that's what we live and breathe every day. For myself and a lot of my clients. And so, but I know that there's other ways that social responsibility communication shows up, and my colleagues will probably speak to that, but at least that's how we see it, from the standpoint that we operate in on a daily basis.
Yeah, I would say typically in my experience working with, outside of Participant, really working with companies where it was sort of a side project, like an idea that, okay, we can use the privileges and the opportunities and the connections we have as a company or as a nonprofit to make change for a specific community. It's always sort of like a side gig that a specific group of people work on. And for me, I didn't want to work in that type of environment where that wasn't considered the priority. So I think Participant is one of those examples of a company that, especially as a B Corp, and the only one in the entertainment industry, it's baked into the mission. So that with every film, we are prioritizing impact, both through the actual story and what the story is trying to convey and highlight as a social ill or a social good, but also through the campaigns that we build around that project as well. But I think generally speaking, I think a lot of people would say social impact is about trying to take the opportunity or the privilege of a business or an organization and trying to focus that towards making, you know, progress or a better opportunity for a community that they have found to be one of their stakeholders or someone that's closer tangential to the work that they do.
Vicky, can I go next?
Sure. I mean, I think that I'll just, first of all, I want to echo everything that Paul said, because I think that really closely aligns the work that I've been doing and that Cause has been doing. And before joining Cause, I was working in-house for a large nonprofit here in Los Angeles that was working on housing. And so I think I want to speak from a bit of a different perspective. And really, for me, I think about CSR in a couple of different ways. I think that it's really partnership focused, right? For it to be effective, it has to be partnership focused, where we look at the stakeholders who are involved in whatever mission-driven work that is meant to be continued, or whatever campaign we're working on, and really coming together from a strengths-based approach, because historically, right, CSR has evolved so much in the past 2 decades, but previously it was really viewed as transactional. And I think what I've really enjoyed seeing in the sector is that we're now approaching social impact work really from this partnership standpoint. It's participatory, which kind of building on what Paul was saying, it's not just about top down, right? It's really embodying, like the organization really embodies the same way that when you support a nonprofit organization, you expect that their work, right, like their objectives, their programs are in service to their mission. And in the same way now, corporations are really embedding CSR into every facet of their operation, so that it's not just siloed, it's really integral. And I think that's where we can really see the most effective systems change work, which is necessary for social change to really occur on a level that we need it to happen especially with these big issues, whether it's sustainability or homelessness or housing. It can't just be one organization for one sector. We really have to come together. And that speaks to a lot of my personal passion for cross-sector collaboration. So I'll pause there and let Christiane.
Thank you, Vicky. You know, when I think about social impact, I love hearing what everybody else has to say, because Paul, you said something so important about changing people's lives. And when we think about the moral imperative of our personal moral imperative, how we act in this world, how we treat other people, how we behave to the planet, all of that, as we all have plastic bottles up here. Sorry about that. I wasn't thinking. But, you know, our responsibility as individuals is critically important. I feel so deeply that we have to start there. But then when we look at the corporate responsibility aspect of things, it's looking at how do corporations impact the communities that they work in, and then sort of thinking about that impact and going, okay, what permission do you, or what space do you have permission to work in? Like, how do you serve your community and the broader community in a way that makes sense for your brand and for your capabilities? So when I think about social impact, it's really, what I love, so we talked a lot about this, and the title of this panel is that we've gotten quite far from the days of let's write a check, let's put a thing in the gala program and say, look what we did, look what we did. And it seems like that is changing, but we have a very long way to go, very long way to go. And when I think about, because we work really in more of the program implementation and management, where these three are really on boots on the ground telling the stories. And it's our job to give them a good story to tell, like a story that's authentic and meaningful, and it's not hard to tell it because it's real. So when I think about social impact, it's really thinking about it from like the authenticity of it, a story that is actually making a change and changing people's lives, reducing inequity, all the things that we want in a brighter future for our world and our society. And right now it's really hard to see that bright future, but then I sit here with all these lovely folks. I'm like, okay, we got this, we're gonna do this. And all of you who are interested in learning more about this, and you're probably doing great work as well.
So talking about stories, I love stories. I love news stories, I love every kind of story. Can you tell us a little bit, a story that you can remember of you making a difference with a story, a campaign that you did? Who would like to start? Vicky?
Sure. So I guess for me, I'll talk a little bit about my orientation toward the sport, just from a personal level, and then get into the question at hand. I came to America when I was 6 years old as a refugee, and so for me, my orientation toward social impact work started at a very young age. I've just always been driven by, motivated by, and wanting to, like I mentioned at the very beginning, wanting to be part of something bigger, and that just came from my upbringing. And I always understood that, like, we have to work together, right? And so fast forward to 10 years, and I was working at the People Concern, which is one of LA's largest housing and homeless services agencies. They've been around for 60 years. And we worked on a campaign called Together We Can End Homelessness. And it sounds really simple, but something that I learned when I was there for 4 years is that when you talk about homelessness, especially in Los Angeles, right, it's the most pressing issue, arguably, in the city, in this county. When you look at the mayoral race that just took place, right, like that's the top issue. And so when you talk to people, everyone wants to help solve it in some way, shape, or form, or at least wants it to end, or just for it to be gone, right? But no one knows where to start. It's an issue of such magnitude and so complex. It feels seemingly intractable. So how do we solve it? And so what I worked on with our team was, and some external partners, really brilliant. We worked on creating a campaign that helped people see how they can make an impact, right? Like, because every little bit counts. I don't mean just financially. I mean just your intentions, showing up, caring when you see somebody experiencing homelessness, when you're walking back to your car this evening, looking them in the eye, saying hello, smiling, I don't know, just anything. It goes such a long way. And so that's something that I'm really proud of. It was the genesis of the People Concerns monthly giving program, and it was really all about showing people how, yes, in Los Angeles we have this massive issue. We're all part of the solution. We have to come together and solve it as individuals, as companies, as businesses, and so on and so forth. So I hope that answered your question, but that's sort of, that's what comes to mind for me when I think about that.
My entry into the social impact world was through environment. My parents are immigrants. My dad was from Germany, and my mom is from El Salvador. And being from countries that, sort of low resources and all the things, like we had to recycle, we reused everything. Every problem was solved by honey, apple cider vinegar, or aloe vera. Like there was no such thing as going to the doctors. And then, long story, I became friends with this super hippie family in the early 90s, and nobody was composting or anything like that. So started volunteering and whatever. So that was my entree into the world of social impact, and started at Disney in the environmental world of CR. So I've had a lot of interesting stories through my career that inspire what we do every day. But one particular story, when I was talking to my colleagues today about tonight's panel, thinking through some stories, we have a client, the California Water Service Company. They are the largest private water service provider west of the Mississippi. We do a program for them called the Cal Water H2O Challenge, and it is a project-based learning competition for elementary school kids up and down the state of California. It's one of my favorite projects. They're one of my, I'm not going to say favorite, but they're one of my favorite clients because they really, really, really invest in this work.
You're just recording it, not pressure.
Yeah, I know, but they're awesome. So when the campfire happened in Paradise and took the entire community down in minutes, everybody was displaced, and some of the students that were relocated to Chico were put into this 4th grade classroom taught by Emily Akimoto. She is this amazing teacher up in Chico, California. And so the fire was in November, and so by the time the kids got to school in December, the existing kids, or the current kids in the class, had already got their Cal Water project set. They were ready to roll, and then these kids came in, and the kids were like, and the teacher, and everybody's like, stop. They felt this real deep call to action to figure out how to do something for the community of Paradise. And so they completely reoriented their entire project. They had been working months on so hard, and they did a watershed program, because what happened after the fire, View Creek was super polluted, and there was all these issues with watersheds, and So they started doing research on the pollution and what they could do. So they started planting plants and they started building fences and they started doing trash pickups. And you all will love this. They did an enormous campaign, community campaign of how everybody could help. And what was so beautiful about this is that, you know, these kids they suffered the greatest tragedy of their lives, and they were able to channel that energy and put it towards something that was super community oriented. It was empowering for themselves. Adults, kids, everybody alike became part of something. And like when I saw it, and the program was just a lovely platform that was just happened to be there. So I don't want to give the program all this credit, but it's when I see when people have an opportunity to do something and to take action and what that does for us as individuals and a community, that is what inspires me to do what I do every day, because it's so powerful. And it's just like, and these kids were fourth graders and we got to, and they won, and they did not win because of the fact that they were, you know, kids from the Paradise Fire. They legitimately won. And so we go up and do this big celebration, and this little boy, oh God, he was wearing little cowboy boots and he was just so sweet. And he's like, this is the hardest thing I've ever been through. And he's like, but I feel so lucky that I got to sit in a classroom with kids that supported me every single day and a teacher that genuinely cared about me every single day after this. And I was like, don't cry. And I was like, thank you. And I was like, okay. So yes, I think that is just one of many stories that we've been really lucky to have in the work that we do.
Thank you.
A lot of times what we as communicators have to do, and I'm sure all of you appreciate it, is how do you change the conversation? How do you change the narrative? We talk a lot about how do we change the narrative. And where that came up pretty powerfully was some work that I did where when we look at where we invest dollars, whether it be on the government side, taxpayer dollars or foundations, you see a lot of money, you know, that's invested in children, young children, you know, to some extent babies, usually children, you know, between, you know, normally grade school, but a population that typically had been getting left out were teenage boys of color anywhere between the ages of 13 to 20. You know, Latino, Black, you know, Native American. And that particular group, the narrative was they're scary, they're criminals, they're irredeemable, they're not worth investing in. And, you know, we saw that with, you know, I mean, the Trayvon Martin incident was in large part because of the narrative of that population and that age group. And so what we needed to do is figure out how do we start to put a different conversation in a different way these young people are looked at and how people see them and how people feel about them from a communication standpoint. And so what we started to do, and we were working with a number of foundations, we had an opportunity to work with the Obama administration at that time, and this ultimately became a legacy project for President Obama. But a lot of what we had to do was start a new narrative around these young people and start to allow people to see a different side of them. And one of the things that we did was we took a group of young teenage high school students to Sacramento. And there was some work being done to try to get the legislature to take some action. And normally, you know, you go to the building, you're gonna have lobbyists go up, you're gonna have adults go up, but we wanted the young people to tell their story to these legislators. And I've worked in politics a long time, and I've never seen a legislator pay more attention in a meeting than hearing these young people talk about their dreams, talk about what they wanted to accomplish, talk about what was important to them, talk about what were the challenges that made it very difficult for them to live their daily lives. And you could see the mindset of these legislators shifting, like right before our eyes, hearing these stories from these young people, where they started to see them not as something they thought before, but this could be my kid, this could be my friend's child, this could be someone that is like anyone else who just wants an opportunity. And we started to see a sea change and more investment. We started to see a sea change in a greater belief in these young people that we started to see before. You know, we started to purposely find ways that we can put more narratives about the fact that these were young people that were our next firemen, our next policemen, our next school teachers, our next people who fly our planes. Like, we wanted people to start to see these folks in a different light, and not as something that was a deficit, which is where they had been. Not to say we've solved that, not to say that there aren't those narratives that still exist, but what we recognize is we had to start doing that, and we started to see change when we invested in it. And so that's one thing I was really proud to be part of with a lot of my colleagues and a lot of other folks out there. But I know for some of you who have seen that up close, changing narrative isn't easy. It requires not only commitment, it requires just continue to bang the drum. It's a constant drumbeat that is necessary if we're going to change those kinds of perceptions and those kinds of biases. Otherwise, we're just going to continue to get to the same result.
Thank you.
Thank you. And first of all, I just love hearing other people talk about the work that they love to do. So I love this question, and I love hearing all your stories. I came to this work, I think, through similarly my family background. My mother is from the Philippines, my dad is from West Philly. And so growing up, a core part of, I think, the conversation in our household always was about how stories were mistold or certain stories were never told. And so for my father, I think a big part of that came from the 1985 police bombing in Philly, and how, you know, that was something that we talked about in our household, but it was never something that I read about in school or something that I understood. And so growing up, he always sort of came to me with the other part of history that wasn't going to be in the book. Like, we always sort of had like this is your history that they're going to tell you in school, this is what actually happened sort of session. And so for me, I always knew I wanted to be a part of shifting those narratives, especially about communities of color. And so a project that I was really, really proud of being able to be a part of was Judas and the Black Messiah and the impact campaign we planned around that last year. I think especially after the heels of what happened in 2020 and obviously all of the preceding instances of police violence, I was beyond excited to jump right into this project the second I knew that participant was going to be a part of it. And part of that was just that obviously throughout 2020 here and other states around the country, people were talking about all of the different ways in which our perception around Blackness, Black liberation, Black Lives Matter were completely warped, and how this was in fact not a new movement, but a movement that had been continuing for decades that people just weren't understanding necessarily in the right way. And so when this film came to us, we knew that it had so much power, that it had the opportunity to shift the narrative around Black liberators and Black movement leaders that had been long sort of relegated to the sidelines of history and weren't given the same shine as other more palatable Black leaders throughout the civil rights movement over the course of the last few decades. So that said, when we got the film, we knew that we obviously were super lucky to be able to work with filmmakers like Shaka King, Ryan Coogler, and Charles King, who were really invested in making sure that was the case, and who had also built a really amazing relationship with Chairman Hampton Jr., Fred Hampton's son, who still was sort of battling with a lot of these misconceptions in Chicago and nationally. Obviously, a lot of the Black Panther Party had been sort of either obviously arrested, still in prison, or sent away or had escaped the country. And so part of our campaign was trying to shift that narrative and reintroducing a lot of the members who were out of prison back to legislators, back to a lot of the same people that had put them there or had pushed them to sort of the sidelines of media representation. And specifically when it came to the Hampton family, it meant bringing them directly to Cook County legislators who in years past had said pretty terrible things about them, or congressional members who had not actually ever given them the time of day to hear them out, hear their stories, and reconsider what in the past we would have considered radical as being actually incredibly necessary and integral to how we do organizing today. So the movement for Black Lives, like if you are a legislator and you support that today, then what can you do to support the families of the Black Panther Party members that obviously were impacted in the way that they were before? So through that, we were able to actually introduce them reintroduce them back to a lot of the legislators in Cook County who then helped push forward the landmarking of the Hampton House, which was a huge deal for the Black Panther Party locally, who still does a lot of that community work. Obviously for a community that's still not really being taken care of by their local government, and then at a national level, reintroducing them to a lot of people in the Congressional Black Caucus, Asian Caucus, and Hispanic Caucus to recognize the fact that the Black Panther Party and a lot of the folks in Chicago sort of laid the groundwork for what we consider to be multicultural organizing today. And obviously through 2020 to now, a lot of corporations, a lot of legislators sort of put their political weight behind the idea of Black Lives Matter. Okay, what does that mean to actually support a lot of these people who were a part of the initial phases of that work years ago? And so we were really excited to get the Hampton House landmark. That actually just happened a couple months ago because we ran that campaign until we were able to achieve that, which we did. And we also helped Huey P. Newton's widow, Frederica Newton, in Oakland with the opening of their museum, as well as the unveiling of a lot of different memorial sites with the National Park Service for the Black Panther Party as well. So for me, that was a huge, huge win, and just a part of some of the initial work to shift narratives around untold stories.
All of these are great stories. Thank you so much. And continuing with, how do we create those campaigns? What elements should a campaign, a PR campaign have? Or how can we make sure to include elements to have that social impact in our day-to-day work? Who would like to start?
I can start. I mean, I think that for an effective campaign, right, a social impact campaign, I think you need to be authentic. I think that's the top priority is authenticity, right? Because our consumers these days, if you're a business or if you're an organization, wherever on the spectrum you are, they can step right through that, right? So authenticity is, I think, paramount. I think specificity is also really important. What are we trying to achieve, right? Like, how can your campaign move the needle in some sort of way on whatever issue or topic that you're pursuing, that your organization is pursuing? I think making sure that it's representative, right? Like that you have the right people at the table, that you do the hard work of asking the questions of who needs to be at this table. That if your campaign is meant to, serve people experiencing homelessness or alleviate hunger, are you talking to people that are actually going to be benefiting from the work that's being done? Are you talking to the CBOs, the nonprofits, NGOs on the ground in those very communities? Are their perspectives reflected in how you're designing this campaign? I think those are really important questions to answer. They take time, so oftentimes we see companies and organizations curtail that, right, and shortcut right to the pretty buzzworthy campaign with a cool slogan and the fast call to action. But at the end of the day, you need to do the hard work for sustainable change. So those are my 3 cents, I guess.
Yeah, she basically just answered how I would answer, so I won't say much more. So thank you for doing that, because then I have less words. The other thing that I would say is because what our job is to, like I said, help these guys be able to tell a good story and have a good campaign, is going back to that permission, that space that companies have permission to play in or work in. Is, are you serving a community that needs something? Is your campaign actually a result of something you did because someone came and said, this is what you need to be doing, not just because you wanted a bright and splashy campaign that looks good. So everything that Vicky said is completely on point. And the last piece is that, we saw this interesting campaign recently that we've sort of been bothered by, where this company sent teachers a bunch of boxes with like chocolate in them, and then they made this big splashy campaign about it. But it was like, you probably spent more money on the marketing than you did on the boxes that you sent to the teachers. And so that's always, like, for us, it's a really big thing, is we never want to tell the story unless there's something really rich and deep there and it actually did something. Like, that is, other than that, we don't want to tell the story. So just our 2 cents is, make sure there's something there. There's something there, and it was because it was a reaction to something that was needed.
Yeah, I mean, I think all that's well said, and the 3 things I got. One is how you maximize the platform of either your own company or organization or those who you're working with. And so what I mean by that is, you know, if you're a business and you have certain constituencies that know you, that you have credibility with, that you have influence with, how do you maximize your platform to reach them to be part of that social responsibility piece to it? You know, so if you're trying to convince, if you have reach with other business owners, with a particular segment of people, how are you able to use your platforms to be able to engage them in that kind of conversation? Because they're going to listen to you. I guess the second thing I'd say is you have to act with integrity. And what I mean by that is there's always a lot of good things that there's great intention, but you have to confirm what's coming. And what I mean by that is, you know, we ran the census campaign for LA County. And we were trying to get people to complete the census, which for those of you know is a very important practice. It's really important exercise. But one of the things that we heard from the immigrant community was their fear of sharing information and having that come back to them, having it hurt them, having it basically work in a negative way. And we could have easily just said, no, you're fine. But we had to confirm that. We had to make sure, like, well, we have a responsibility to make sure, like, we are not really putting them in danger, that these bad things aren't going to happen to them. And so we had active conversations with attorneys and other folks to just make sure that there was regulation and protections that we can confidently tell these folks, look, we hear your concern, we understand where you're coming from, but there are protections and they look like this. There is precedent that's going to protect you so that these things don't happen. And so making sure that you take those steps becomes a really important part, because we always want to do the right thing, but sometimes if we don't check and you know, do sort of that next step, we can inadvertently get the community in trouble, and basically we have the opposite impact. The third thing I would just say is you gotta be willing to play the long game, because a lot of the things that we're doing in social responsibility communications don't happen overnight. You know, the change we're trying to make, the things we're trying to move people to, the conversation we're trying to have with folks, you're not going to convince people in one conversation, one ad spot, one article in the newspaper that you're able to place, one social media post that you're able to get out there, and suddenly everyone's going to be fine. You know, it's going to require a lot of back and forth. And so you have to be willing to and invest in the long game if we're going to get the results that we want. You know, so when you have, like, you know, a group like Participant who's putting out really great film and content, they're not saying, well, it's just going to be this one film that's going to do it. Like, they're thinking about the second and third, the fifth, the 10th thing that they're going to put out there that reinforces this point. And I guarantee you that when they talk about, you know, when you were talking about, you know, what you're trying to do about Black liberation and change those narratives, I'm sure you're already thinking about 3 or 4 other projects that are going to reinforce that. And so that becomes just a big part of the rigor with this work that has been important, as far as when you think about a campaign, you almost have to think of it in the long run, not just this one moment. It's kind of like the battle versus the war. Like, you have to be involved in the war, you know, because the battle is, you might get a short-term win, but ultimately, unless you continue to follow up, you're going to retrench.
100%. +1 on everything you guys said. I think the thing that I always come back to is partnership, that, like, you need to be thinking really strategically about how you leverage your partnerships internally and externally to make sustainable change and to make sustainable campaigns. I think obviously with a lot of the campaigns that we're talking about, there are many people who are focused on the short-term battles and not necessarily the war. So it's about obviously communicating how that battle is really important. And also we're talking 2 years of change down the line that we're really trying to work towards. But also I really love the point that was made about the fact that we need to make sure that there's actually a problem to solve. That, does the community want this? Do they need this? And do they want to do it this way? Because I think that's often another rub that I've seen, is that, of course, there are easy, you know, Band-Aid solutions to a lot of the problems that we're talking about, but we're actually talking about doing something in a way that creates lasting change and does no harm, which I think should always be an operating principle for a lot of this work, is that does no harm first is the most important thing that you should be thinking about, especially when you're talking about vulnerable communities who otherwise would probably be okay if we didn't meddle. But if we're gonna meddle, let's make it good. So I just think that's really important too.
Thank you, thank you. So now we're at the part of the conversation when we want to hear from you. Does anybody have a question for our panelists?
Oh.
Eric.
A quick question. You just mentioned do no harm, which really struck me, because I always think that way, like first rule of medicine, same as the first rule of PR, do no harm. Can you give an example of a campaign? You don't have to name anybody, but a campaign that did harm.
I think, I'm trying to think of a specific one that was a CSR campaign. I think, I won't give too many specifics to make it obvious, but I think, for example, the investment in certain organizations at a national level, especially when it comes to racial progress, like I think especially through 2020 to 2021, where everyone was dumping money in communities of color or organizations of color, that always gets really dicey to me, because I think what people often misunderstand, especially at these bigger national corporations, is that it might not necessarily do harm, but it doesn't necessarily do good. And I also think that's just as problematic, because there's almost this blanket idea that if you just give to like these 5 organizations, that you're sort of like, you're hitting all the Black people, and that's just not how it works, or hitting all of the folks of different marginalized communities. And so to me, often that's almost just as bad as doing explicit harm to a specific community, because you're relegating everybody into these 5 organizations that we can't necessarily confirm or deny whether that money is trickling down and making actual impact.
I'll give you an example of harm.
There we go.
There was a public,
Recorded now.
yeah, I'm not going to say which one. There was a public housing agency that had a pretty bad reputation of how they treated their housing tenants. You know, keep in mind, this is a city agency, public sector, taxpayer dollars, low-income people living in, you know, in essence, the projects. And this is the agency responsible for overseeing that housing. A lot of allegations of corruption, you know, how well they managed the properties, how they treated the tenants, just on and on and on. They were looking for communication support. Okay, so show up at the bidders conference to hear about what they want to do. And I was thinking, okay, what they're trying to do, hopefully in my mind, is they want to take a turn. They want to get their agency together. They want communication support so they can start to talk about how they're going to hold themselves more accountable, the changes they're going to make, reforms, everything. So I'm like, fine, I'm support that. And I show up, and really what they wanted was for an agency to spin all the bad things they were doing. And they didn't exactly say it that way, but it was pretty clear with how they portrayed the support they were looking for. That's what they really wanted us to do. And the harm we would have done was basically try to make them look better and not hold their feet to the fire for what they should be held accountable for. So all the bad publicity and everything else that was coming our way was deserved, you know? And so I wasn't going to be in a position to say, well, let's sort of move the heat off of you because you don't like it and you don't want to be sort of held accountable and have the light on you, you know? And so I said, no, like we're not doing that. I mean, I'm on the other side. Like I'd rather work with the advocates who are going to continue to like hammer you, you know, in order to do that. So I mean, that's a good example of where harm could really happen. And I'm sure some firm took the work and probably, you know, did things to, you know, make them try to, you know, fend off the criticism, but that's harm in a real way.
I'm not going to name names, but and I want to start with, I know the intent was right in this, but the buy one, give one sort of motto. So you buy something and then they give the same thing to the community. When this sort of all started, no one thought about the impact it would have in the local community of taking jobs away because you were giving the stuff away for free. Like no one took the time to think about that. And I understand, again, the intent was good, but this is why doing like your really deep research and making sure there is a need before you decide, here you go, look what I did for you. That to me is the most important thing, because if no one needs it, like it can be incredibly destructive. So it's really important to know what you're actually trying to do before you try to do it. Are you a doctor?
No.
Oh, okay, you said medicine, so I was like, oh, maybe.
I do a lot of
There's one
healthcare.
on TV.
Yeah, well, Vicky.
Anything to add?
No, I think in interest of time, I'm okay to
Okay.
bypass.
Next question. Yeah.
First of all, this is a terrific panel. I'm very grateful that all of you made the time to come tonight. My question is that you are the communicators, I believe, as opposed to the people that are actually like delivering the benefit or the services to the community. And I want to understand more the interplay between, you know, doing it and talking about it and the conflicts that can occur, because it can ring hollow, it could be you know, misinterpreted, there's such things doing too much. And I'm just interested in that tension between doing it and talking about it.
Who wants to start?
Vicky, I think you should take this one.
Yeah, I can, thank you. I think that you have to really understand, to your point, you have to understand the inner workings of what an organization is doing, whether you're coming at it from a consulting angle or from in-house. So in my most recent experience before Cause, I was a communications director for People Concern, and it's a really large agency that does great work, super complicated, right? Homelessness, domestic violence, very complex issues, countywide. So how do we tell that story? And so for me, it took a lot of building systems and processes internally to really understand what it meant to participate and lead ethical storytelling, to tell the stories of our staff in a way that was ethical, to tell the stories of our clients that was ethical, right? To put them at the forefront of that, because at the end of the day, they were testament to homelessness being solvable. And so if that's the case, then how do we tell those stories? And it takes getting to know people on a personal level, having conversations with them, and just really getting deep into the workings of the organization in terms of the operations, the structure, what impact we're trying to achieve, what does success look like, defining that, because I think at the end of the day, communications is meant to be a vehicle, right? It's a vehicle that we can use to advance these really important issues. And so to do that, though, you have to have a really deep understanding and be able to communicate about it in a way that is authentic, and to understand first then the basic communication, like who is your audience, right? What are we trying to achieve? Are we trying to get money? Are we trying to get, is it an awareness campaign? Is it just, you know, are we trying to form some sort of consortium? Like what is it that we're trying to do as an organization? And what is your mission at the end of the day? It always has to come back to your mission, and is everything we're doing in service to that? Because if you're a mission-driven organization, that is what you're held accountable to. And your goals have to be built around that in terms of communications, your finance goals, your fundraising goals, all of that has to align. Otherwise, it doesn't work.
Paul's example, I love the example of the housing issue, because that happens, it's changing, but how many fires companies have tried, or organizations have tried to use communications to put out. And so I'm going to pass it back to you, because that happens all the time, is no one's talking. I mean, they're talking, but they're like, we don't care what you say, just make us look better. And so that collaboration between who's actually providing the services versus who's talking about it is everything. Otherwise, this is what happens.
Well, no, and I mean, you raise a really great question, because a lot of times when we're talking to an organization who is providing, let's say, a service, and there's a couple that come to mind immediately. So we're working with an organization that works with youth to do basic career training. So these are kids who have dropped out of high school usually. You know, we're trying to figure out ways to get their GED, and we could get other kinds of job placement. And so they came to us and they said, you know, we want to do an outreach campaign to get more of these young people to the door and to have them participate in the program. And one of the first questions we started to talk with them about is, okay, do you have the infrastructure set up to meet the demand that we may generate by doing more communications? So what we don't want to create is a situation that, you know, we get all this interest and the kids, you know, send the email or they call the number and no one answers. or the group or the nonprofit's overwhelmed by the amount of interest that's coming in where they don't know what to do with it. And so what we had to really start to unpack is, do you have the other parts of the infrastructure set up to support the kind of drive that we're going to do? Otherwise, like, we're going to have to stage this out. Otherwise we got to take other steps. The same thing happened when we were working with the County of LA on COVID outreach. And, the county wanted us to help promote testing, to help promote vaccinations. And the conversation we were constantly having with the county was, how do we make sure we don't over communicate in ways where suddenly, like, you have people who are trying to get, and are waiting hours on end, or go to the place and something's wrong, or they go to the website and it's down, and so to your point, like, there has to be that very real conversation on operational level, so that we're not getting ahead of the group of the organization, but that we're working in lockstep with them in terms of their operations, if our part of the job is going to work.
Thank you. Let's go on to the next question. You had a question?
Yeah, so in today's age, there's obviously a lot of information overload. People, I think, change their minds when one story happens and then they move on to the next one in 15 minutes, whatever the next story is, whether it's a shooting, whether it's an issue, whatever that is. What are some of the strategies you all use to keep people engaged, knowing that, hey, this is a long-term kind of solution we have to come to, but we also have to combat this idea that we can lose people's attention throughout the course of just life. Civil rights movement, everyone, that's what you just did. You didn't have anything else to focus on, but now there's so many things pulling for our attention. So what are some of the strategies that you all implement to keep people focused on that thing that is so important to move the statistics in the right direction?
That's a great question. Right now, the attention span is what, 10 seconds, 15 seconds, whatever TikTok says. So who would like to answer?
I can answer. I think part of it is just repetition across all platforms and really working closely on my end. When I think about it, I think about our digital team and how, before thinking about TikTok and Instagram and how it's always changing and all of the different ways in which these platforms sort of have evolved, it's making sure that we stay fresh on those things to understand that that's how news is happening, that Twitter is actually a news platform now, and that Instagram and TikTok, these are places where people are learning all this information, so we can't ignore them. They're not the New York Times, but we certainly need to treat them as importantly as possible as well, because thousands and potentially millions of people are going to see that over possibly a New York Times article. So just knowing who your audience is and catering to what their media appetite to be, and also just adjusting some of that information to consistently sort of hit that drumbeat on those pieces of content as well. So I think it's really repetition, but also staying true to the story itself. So you might not need to update people every week about what's going on with a certain campaign or a story, but just focusing on really high impact moments that people are going to pay attention to these issues, but then also making sure that it can be spread across platforms in ways that will reach the people that you're trying to reach.
Anybody else want to chime in?
I mean, I think a big part of it is the upfront work you do, particularly as you think about your audience. Because one of the mistakes we see a lot of our clients make is they want to communicate with everyone. So we ask them, who are you trying to communicate to? They're like, the community. And you're like, okay, let's drill down a little bit. Is it single mothers? Is it, older people? Is it young people? Is it, urban folks? Is it rural? Because each of them are going to come at things differently, in terms of where they get information, in terms of who they listen to, the things that they care about, the things that are going to matter. And so the more you're able to be very specific about what audiences you're trying to reach, how you then define your message, and then where you communicate that message through, it's going to depend on the audiences. So, when we did work, I mentioned on the census, one of the things we learned, for example, when we were trying to communicate with, with Latin families, was you had to come at the census from a perspective, how is it going to help their children and the future of their children? That was what they cared about the most. When we were talking about API communities, a big thing was about school. How is it going to improve education for their kids? And so everyone was sort of coming at it slightly different. When we were talking about Native Americans, they were like, okay, what is it going to mean for services for our community? Because our community just gets forgotten. You know, how are we going to make sure that the census can help us right-size that? And so thinking about your audience and being as detailed and specific as you can is going to help, you know, sort of break through the noise, because you're also going to be thoughtful about the things that they care about and what's going to matter to them. So the way I might communicate to you is going to be different from what I might communicate to this person over here. Because I'm going to sort of figure out, like, what do you care about versus what does she or he care about? And how am I going to adjust my message on that? And do you primarily look at get your information through a YouTube video versus someone else who's maybe going to be watching something on television, you know, or, you know, reading a newspaper article? And so being able to spend the time, you know, doing that upfront work is worth the effort, because you're going to waste your time later on and you're going to have to come back to that anyway.
So we're coming down to the end. One more question, then we go with closing remarks.
I'd like to go back to the idea of authenticity and the importance of that. Our clients come to us they're looking for cause-related marketing campaigns to attach a celebrity to, want authentic matches where the celebrity's been touched, you know, themselves personally by. But a lot of times, what I find is their corporate social responsibility initiative or their cause-related marketing strategy is not really authentic. It's just, here, let me do something good. So what are the questions that you think corporations should be asking to make sure that what they're doing is in fact authentic? So that word authenticity, how do you make sure that is the case in a CSR campaign?
Great question.
Vicky, you touched on some of it, but I'd like to hear more about that from others.
Oh, I have so many things to say, but I know we have little time. The celebrity thing is something that makes me want to rip my eyeballs out half the time. And I only say that because it's rarely authentic. There are very few cases that I could look at and go, wow, that person's experienced that, and so therefore they have the right to talk about it, or that person has been intimately involved in it. It's very rare that you see that. So I think
we can have a conversation.
Totally, totally. I was like, can we talk after, please? Yeah.
Anybody else?
Participant. Yeah, I would say it has to be core to the mission, I think, and core to the mission of the person. Like, there has to be like a track record to, when I think about the celebrity part of it, I think about a lot of the talent that we work with in our films and how they sort of come to these projects. And we don't often, there are cases where we have campaigns around certain films and some of the talent isn't interested in doing anything with it because they're like, actually, I have nothing to say about this issue. And we're like, great, don't. Because otherwise, like, it's inauthentic. But for example,
I'm talking about not the celebrities. Forget the celebrity. I just threw that out because in context of what we do. But I'm talking about companies themselves, okay? How do they make sure that their cause-related marketing program is authentic to them? What are those questions they need to ask?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's sort of thinking about, going back to the permission thing. So water utility company that we work with, they were running out of water in California, and they're like, oh God, we need to stay in business, and without water, we don't have a business. So they were investing tons of money in, you know, the future generations of engineers and scientists, and really thinking about these bigger, complex issues because they're a water company. So that's just like a really natural fit. So when clients come to us and say, do something good for us, we're like, okay, well, let's figure out what you can do that actually makes sense for what you do as a company. So
what questions should they ask?
Oh, well,
figure that out.
I think one of the biggest questions is why do you want to work in, let's say, women in the workforce? Why is it, like, let's say that's what they want to do. Why? Okay, how can your company actually do something that has a positive impact on women in the workforce? Those are like the two biggest questions we start with, is why, and why do you think you're the guys to do it? And then it just kind of goes from there. But that's really where we start.
We also need to ask, who else is in the space? What else is going on? Where am I going to fit into this? Because I guarantee you there's a ton of folks who are in that space who are doing work, and the best thing they could do is understand what that is so they can link arms and partner. So that they're not like, suddenly I'm here and it's like, okay, well, yes, you're late to the party, you know? So, you know, now you got to sort of find a way to be sitting at the table in a different way. I think the other thing goes back to something Rosalina said is, to what extent is the community, they're saying they want to help, want their help, and how are they willing to listen to that community and ask them, what is it that we could do as a company that would be helpful to you? We're interested in X, tell us what we could do, and be prepared to maybe do some things that, they have to have some hard conversations also before they enter the space, that they might be asked to do something that they weren't prepared to do, but they have to be open to it. It can't just be like, I'm going to look at it so narrowly, and the community wants like 3 other things that are going to be much more important, and it's going to be actually a better thing for the company to do. But they're like, well, wow, we haven't thought about that yet. And so, you gotta spend some time really doing some of that background work.
So I know there are more questions. However, it's getting late. You can come up and talk to our panelists. They're here, and I think they will talk to everybody here. So final thoughts. If there's one thing that we should all think about when communicating about social responsibility and the impact that we're having, what would it be? One thing.
I think just being really intentional. Just being really intentional, and I think that speaks to the goals, that speaks to the authenticity, just I think it's all encompassing.
Thank you.
Making sure that you actually care, that you actually care about it.
Just commitment. Gotta stay committed.
Commitment. Okay.
I would say investment.
Okay. Thank you, Ali.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming, everybody. I don't know about you guys, but I feel so much better for the state of the world knowing that these folks are on the forefront of helping make it a better place and helping push companies in that direction. So, as Yurina said, everyone will be outside, so please don't bombard them, but you can ask them more questions if you have them. I love how many notebooks are out, people taking notes. I was doing it too. I love that folks are learning something. So thank you so much for coming. Thank you again to our brilliant panelists, you guys.